During the final assault on a remote desert base, with 200 enemy fighters closing in and no air support for hours, one woman climbed a collapsing water tower. Bullets sparked off the metal around her. Mortars turned toward her position. She stayed exposed on the catwalk anyway, calling fire missions for 38 soldiers fighting for their lives below, until the entire structure groaned, tilted, and began to fall. She wasn't supposed to be there. Days earlier, a small hooded figure had stepped off a supply truck, scanned the entire base in 4 silent seconds, and walked straight to a condemned tower everyone else avoided. That same night, from 2,000 meters away in total darkness, she took out an enemy scouting party with 3 impossible shots, saving the base before anyone understood what was happening. But the real threat wasn't outside the wire. Someone inside the base was feeding the enemy patrol schedules and defensive gaps. And this woman carried a secret the desert had tried to bury 5 years earlier. She was the lone survivor of a classified team betrayed and left for dead. Who was she, and how far would she go to settle a debt written in blood? The truck came in at dusk, 3rd vehicle in a 3-vehicle convoy, standard supply run, food, ammunition, medical stock, and whatever else forward operating base Ashburn needed to keep 38 people alive in the New Mexico desert for another week. Nothing unusual, except the tailgate of the 3rd truck dropped, and she stepped down. Commander Tate Bowman stood in the shadow of the operations tent, with his arms crossed, and watched it happen. He'd been watching convoys roll through that gate for 8 months. He knew how people moved when they came off a truck in a forward operating base. The first-timers, scanning too fast, eyes going everywhere at once, trying to absorb everything before they'd even found their footing. The veterans moving with the loose efficiency of people who'd done this enough times that their body handled the logistics while their mind was already somewhere else. She moved like neither of those things. Small. Maybe 5'3", desert camo 2 sizes too large, hanging off her frame like it belonged to someone else. A hood pulled low enough that Bowman couldn't see her face, and a rifle slung over her shoulder that looked like it had survived several wars and held opinions about the experience. But it wasn't the rifle that stopped him. It was her eyes. What little he could see of them beneath that hood. The instant her boots hit the ground, they moved. One smooth, unhurried rotation. Gate, guard positions, cover points between the operations tent and the motor pool. Sight lines from the east wall to the equipment shed, the gap in the sandbag barrier on the south side where 2 walls didn't quite meet. The condemned eastern tower, rusted and off-limits, standing at the perimeter like a bad idea nobody had gotten around to demolishing. 4 seconds. She'd carried the entire base in 4 seconds. Then she walked. Not toward the check-in station, not toward the briefing tent, not toward any of the places a new arrival was supposed to go. Straight toward the eastern tower, the one with the warning sign. The one that groaned in the wind on bad nights like it was reconsidering its structural commitments. Corporal Nate Aldridge materialized at Bowman's elbow. 25 years old, scout sniper, 6 years in. Currently wearing the expression of a man who had just witnessed something that offended his professional standards on a cellular level. "They sending us kids now, sir?" Bowman didn't answer, because Sergeant Briggs was already jogging after her, tablet in hand, doing the thing NCOs did when someone didn't follow procedure, which was jog and talk simultaneously and hope one of those activities produced results. Hey, you can't just." She stopped, turned, the movement so sudden and so complete that Briggs actually stepped back. One involuntary step, like his body had made a decision his brain hadn't caught up to yet. "You got orders for me." Her voice was quiet, not soft, quiet the way certain rooms were quiet, the kind that made people lean in or step back and left very little middle ground. Briggs fumbled with his tablet. "Says here your fire support. Long-range recon, temporary assignment. But procedure says you need to check in at. I need high ground and a rifle rest." She looked at the tower. Direct, certain, like the conversation had already concluded. "That works. That tower has been condemned. Structural assessment, 8 months ago. They said the upper platform has significant." She was already walking. Bowman watched her disappear through the tower door. The hinges complained. The whole structure shifted slightly, the way things shifted when they'd been given up on and then asked to matter again. Aldridge was still beside him. $5 says she asks for reassignment by morning. Bauman said nothing, but he didn't go back inside, because he was still thinking about those 4 seconds, and the fact that in 8 months at Ashburn, he had never once in that time looked at the gap in the south sandbag wall and thought, vulnerability. He'd looked at it and thought, maintenance request, low priority. She'd looked at it and filed it in under a second without breaking stride. That wasn't a rookie. That wasn't shell shock either. That was someone who had learned to read a space the way other people read faces, automatically, constantly, without choice. Whatever she was not what she appeared to be. And Bowman had been doing this long enough to know that when something didn't fit the category you'd put it in, you paid attention until you understood why. He went back inside. But he left the operations tent flap open so he could see the tower. The joke started before the food was cold. The mess tent at FOB Ashburn had its own ecosystem. 38 people in a forward operating base with irregular sleep schedules and too much adrenaline and not enough enemy contact to discharge it produced a social environment that was, at its best, a tight and functional unit, and, at its less than best, a petri dish for the specific cruelties of boredom. By the time dinner was served, someone had started a betting pool on the whiteboard by the coffee station. Cries first night, 3-1. Can't qualify with her own weapon, 2-1. Requests reassignment inside 48 hours tower, even money. People were actually putting cash down. Aldridge was at the center of it, grinning in the way he grinned when he was performing for an audience and knew it and didn't care. Come on, he said to the room at large, loading his tray. You all saw her. She looks like she got lost on her way to somewhere else and ended up here by accident. Your assessment is based on what exactly? Sergeant Dina Roark set her tray down at the end of the table. Not the crash of someone angry. The controlled placement of someone containing something. Based on what I can see with my eyes, Sarge. And what you can see with your eyes is a small woman in a big jacket. Roark looked at him evenly. Remarkable. A real tactical analysis. I'm a scout sniper. Observation is literally my. You want to know what I observe? Roark leaned forward, not raising her voice, which was somehow more effective than raising it. I observed someone step off a truck in a hot zone and not flinch once. Not once. Didn't ask where anything was. Didn't pull out a map. Just looked at this place for about 4 seconds and went exactly where she needed to go. She picked up her fork. That is not a person who got lost. That is a person who has been to places that made this one look like a rest stop, or its dissociation, someone offered from the far end of the table, PTSD. We've all seen it present like that. The flat affect, the not asking questions thing. It's a trauma response. It's not trauma response. The voice came from the tent entrance, Bowman. He hadn't planned to stop there. He'd been doing rounds. He had patrol schedules that needed reviewing, and an equipment manifest that didn't add up, and approximately 15 things more pressing than mess tent sociology. But here he was. He moved to the coffee station, poured something that technically qualified as coffee by virtue of being hot and brown. Rourke's right, he said, without turning around. What I watched on that tarmac was operational assessment. Systematic. Practiced. She mapped this entire base in the time it takes most people to find their footing after a truck ride. He turned. Looked at Aldridge specifically. Whatever story you're telling yourself about her, it's the wrong one. The table was quiet. Aldridge had the grace to look at least partially reconsidered. Bowman looked through the tent's open flap. The eastern tower stood against the last light of the sky, rust and metal, and the silent argument of something that should have been taken down months ago. At the top, barely visible, a small shape, motionless, the silhouette of someone who had been up there for hours and showed no particular interest in coming down. She's been up there since she got off the truck, Rourke said, following his gaze. No water, no food. Didn't ask about quarters. What is she watching? Aldridge asked. Genuinely now. The performance dropped. Rourke looked at him. Everything. Bowman set his coffee down. Pull anything you can find on her assignment orders, he said to no one in particular, because in a tent with 30 people, He could trust any of them with a request like that. And somebody get water up to that tower. Leave it at the base. She doesn't have to take it. But it should be there. He left behind him the betting pool on the whiteboard. Ahead of him, a phone call he'd been putting off since the convoy arrived. The radio cracked open at 2200 hours. Bowman was in the operations center alone, working through patrol schedules for the next 72 hours. When Watch 2 came through, actual, this is Watch 2. We have movement on the eastern ridge, 2,300 meters out, approximately. Thermals showing 3, possibly 4 signatures. They're moving wrong, sir. Too deliberate for locals. Bowman was already reaching for his radio. Hold position. Do not engage. Keep eyes on. Copy, actual. But, sir, they're in a pattern. Like they're mapping something, mapping patrol routes. Which meant they weren't scouts passing through. They were building a picture of Ashburn's defensive habits, which meant something larger was coming. Bowman was pulling on his jacket when the night broke. A single shot, somewhere above and to the right. Sharp and clean and unlike anything in Ashburn's inventory. Too controlled, too suppressed, too precise. Then silence, then Watch 2. And the man's voice had changed into something that was trying to be professional and not entirely managing it. One of them just dropped, sir. Just dropped. Like someone cut every string at once. I have no idea where that shot came from. Second shot, 2 down. Sir, that is not one of ours. That weapon is not standard issue. That's not, it's her. Bowman said it before he'd decided to say it, with a certainty that surprised him. It's the woman from the truck. He was already moving. The condemned tower groaned under his weight. Every rung felt like a negotiation. Metal stressed in ways that the structural engineers had been optimistic about. He climbed anyway, ignoring the 2-man security detail, trying to keep up below him, because he needed to see this and he needed to see it now. At the top, she knelt in firing position. The rifle was old. A modified M40, Vietnam-era stock, rebuilt and refined by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A suppressor that had been field-machined rather than factory-fitted. She fired. The weapon barely moved. A slight exhalation, a cough of compressed air and propellant. Like the gun itself was being careful. Watch 2, confirm. Bowman said into his radio. 3 down, sir. Whoever they were, they are running. Fast. He climbed the last rung. Stepped onto the platform. Stand down. She didn't move. Kept her eye pressed to the scope with the focus of someone for whom the world outside that glass circle had temporarily ceased to exist. I said, stand. 4 targets, for her voice was flat, mechanical. The voice of someone reporting facts from a great distance. 2 scouts, 2 spotters. Range 2340. Wind east-northeast, 9 knots, gusting to 12. Temperature drop affecting air density. I compensated up. She fired once more. They were building a patrol map. They have what they came for now. They won't use it tonight. Then she stood, slung the rifle over her shoulder with the ease of long habit. And Bowman saw her wrist, the sleeve pulled back as she adjusted the sling. A tattoo. Not decorative. Not the kind people got because they liked the image. A lynx in mid-strike, rendered in black ink with the precision of something that meant something specific to a specific institution. And below it, barely visible in the moonlight, a serial number. His blood went cold. He'd seen that mark before, in classified briefings. In after-action reports that had been sealed and stamped and assigned to the kind of filing that meant no one was expected to go looking. In the documentation of an operation that officially had produced no survivors. What's your name? He asked. Quiet. She pulled the hood lower. What does my file say? My file says your fire support, temporary assignment. Then that's who I am. That tattoo. He kept his voice level, steady. The way he kept his voice when things were not level or steady, and steadiness was the only useful contribution he could make. I've seen it before. There was a unit, Bravo Wraith. Tier 1. Declared Kia in a classified operation on the southern border. 5 years ago, the official record says there were no survivors. She went very still, not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of someone who had been waiting for a particular door to open and was deciding, in real time, whether to walk through it or push it closed again. You're looking at the wrong person, she said finally. Am I? She moved. Fast and fluid, and with the economy of motion of someone whose body had been trained past the point where thought preceded action. Past him. Toward the ladder, Bowman caught her arm. Felt nothing but muscle and old scar tissue through the fabric. Not the arm of someone who'd been doing desk work for 5 years. People went looking for Bravo Wraith after the operation, he said. Good people. Friends of mine. They came back with nothing. They deserve to know what happened. She pulled free. Clean. Definitive. Then they deserve better information than I can give them. She paused on the ladder. Just for a moment. Hood catching the wind off the desert. I'm fire support, she said. That's the deal you've got. Don't spend tonight trying to renegotiate it. She went down, and the tower was just a tower again. Metal and rust and the wind. Bowman stood at the top of it for a long moment, looking at the ridge where 3 hostile scouts were not going to be filing their patrol report tonight. Looking at the desert that had swallowed her and was offering nothing back. Then he climbed down, went to the operations center, and called Margot Finch. Finch answered on the second ring, past midnight in Washington, which meant she'd been awake. Which meant she'd been expecting this, Tate. Her voice was careful, in a way that was different from her usual careful. Margot Finch was always careful. 19 years in intelligence produced a particular relationship with carelessness, which was that you didn't have one. But this was a different quality. Careful like someone who had been rehearsing a conversation and was now deciding in real time how much of the rehearsed version to use. I have a situation, he said. I know. Not. Tell me more. Not. What kind of situation? Present tense. Certain Bowman leaned back in his chair. Let that land. She's been here 12 hours, Margot. Shot 3 hostile scouts at 2,300 meters in the dark with a suppressed rifle that is not in our inventory. She has a Bravo Wraith tattoo on her wrist. The serial number matches the team leader's identification code from the classified casualty report. A silence on the line. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Don't dig into this, Tate. Finch's voice had changed. Something underneath the carefulness now. Not quite warning. Not quite apology. Somewhere in the territory between the two. She's there because she's supposed to be. Let her work. That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting tonight, Margot. He said her name flat. Not a question, not a request. A statement that contained 19 years of working alongside someone and knowing exactly what it sounded like when they were holding the part of the story that mattered. A pause. She's good at what she does, Finch said. Better than anyone else I could have sent. And Ashburn needs exactly what she is right now. Another pause, shorter, the kind that felt like a door closing rather than opening. Trust me on this, Tate, please. That's twice in one conversation you've told me something without telling me anything. Get some sleep. You have a long few days ahead. The line went dead. Bowman set the phone down, looked at the operations center around him. Maps, radio equipment, the coffee maker that always burned the last inch of every pot, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Finch knew. Not just knew, had arranged, had placed this officially dead woman at Ashburn deliberately, without informing anyone in the chain between them. Which meant what she was protecting wasn't just the woman's identity. It was something she was afraid to put in writing, or someone she was afraid of. He sat with that for a long time. Then he pulled out everything he could access on Bravo Wraith, which was not much. A unit designation, an operation date, a list of names all marked Kaye, and one redacted after-action report from a southern border operation that had gone catastrophically wrong. Bad intelligence, wrong location, massive hostile presence, 12 operators in and none out, with a single incompletely redacted footnote at the bottom that someone had been in too much of a hurry to fully black out. Lone survivor extracted 22 days post-operation. Severe physical and psychological trauma. Identity withheld per operational security protocol. Recommendation. Permanent medical retirement and full identity reassignment. And a reference number. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at his notes from the tower. The serial number he'd memorized from her wrist. They matched. He sat back. Outside somewhere, the tower creaked in the desert wind. And somewhere above it, or inside it, or gone from it into quarters she'd found without asking. The lone survivor of an operation that had no survivors was sleeping. or not sleeping, or doing whatever it was she did with the hours between one crisis and the next. He didn't go to bed. He left the desk lamp on and waited for morning. The intelligence brief arrived at 0630, and it was not good. 32 vehicles, mixed technicals and transport, moving through the Northern Canyon approach. Estimated time to Ashburn's outer perimeter, 90 minutes. Air support availability, 6 hours minimum. The word reinforcements appeared nowhere in the document. Bowman called everyone in 38 faces. Tired, scared under the professionalism. Nobody said it out loud. Nobody needed to. The math was legible to anyone who had been doing this long enough. Hostiles in Canyon Reach, he said. The tactical map on the table had the route marked in red. 90 minutes. We are outnumbered and we are doing this without air cover until it arrives. Which it will. In 6 hours he looked at each face in turn. We hold. We make this base cost more than it's worth. Any questions about that? Silence. The kind that meant no. And the asset? Rourke asked. The sniper. Every head in the room turned. She was standing at the back of the tent, hood still up, arms crossed. Nobody had told her about the meeting. Nobody had needed to. She'd known about it, apparently, the way she seemed to know most things. By paying attention to everything all the time without appearing to. Long-range interdiction, Bowman said. She hits their command structure before they reach firing range. Aldridge shifted in his seat. He was trying. Bowman could see the trying. But the trying had limits, sir. 1 rifle against 32 vehicles. I respect what she did last night, I do. But this is a different 3 shots, her voice from the back of the room, quiet, carrying. She stepped forward, into the overhead light. First time anyone in that room had seen her face clearly. Young, not the old she carried in her eyes, but the face itself, late 20s at most. Sharp features. The particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago not to let things arrive on their face before they decided to put them there. Lead vehicle carries their field commander. She pointed at the map. Didn't look at it. Second vehicle is their communications array. Third is the heavy weapons platform. I take those 3 in sequence, and their convoy becomes a traffic jam in a canyon, with no lateral exits, confused, stationary, and completely unable to coordinate a response. From what range? Rourke asked. Canyon narrows at the 1400 mark. Wind off the valley floor runs high, but it's manageable with the right compensations. Aldridge leaned forward. He wasn't performing now. He was genuinely engaging, which was a different thing and cost him something. I have been a scout sniper for 6 years. I know exactly what you're describing. 3 shots, moving targets under combat conditions, with canyon thermals affecting ballistics. That is not manageable. That is the outside edge of physically possible. She looked at him, not with contempt, not with annoyance, with the calm, absolute patience of someone who has stopped needing other people to believe something in order to know it is true. I don't miss, she said, simply. The way someone said, it is Tuesday. Aldridge opened his mouth, closed it. The room made its decision in the silence. Bowman made his assignments as briefed. Rourke, coordinate fields of fire from the south and west walls. Aldridge, you have the east approach. Everyone else defensive positions, weapons hot. No one fires without confirmation of hostile intent. We do not give them a reason to escalate that we haven't already planned for. He looked at the room. Move out. The tent emptied fast. The way tents emptied when people had somewhere to be that mattered. She stayed. I need something to call you on the radio, Bowman said. She considered this for a moment that stretched slightly past comfortable. Callahan, is that your name? It's what you can call me. He studied her, this woman, officially dead. Standing in his operations tent at 0645 like she had every right to be there, which she did, and like she had always been here, which she had not. Those people, nodding toward the empty tent flap. Some of them are barely old enough to legally buy a drink, I know. If this doesn't work, it will work. Not aggressive, not defensive, just accurate. I cannot promise no one gets hurt today. I can promise that every person who tries to take this base will find it significantly harder than they planned. She turned to go. Callahan, she stopped. After today, he said, we're going to have a real conversation, a beat. She looked back at him. The hood in shadow. The eyes doing what her eyes did. carrying more than she was saying, more than she'd probably said to anyone in a very long time. "Some conversations keep," she said. "Not this one." A silence, and in it something flickered, not quite recognition, something earlier than recognition. The thing that happened between two people when one of them said something that arrived somewhere the other person hadn't expected it to reach. "We'll see," she said. And she was gone. She positioned herself on the ridge at 745, rock and sparse desert vegetation. Minimal cover. She didn't need much. Needed a stable surface, clean sight lines to the canyon's narrow point, and the wind readings from the last 4 minutes, which she'd been collecting since she got here. Logged in the small battered notebook she pulled from her kit. The rifle came apart and came back together in under 90 seconds. Scope 0 checked. Anemometer out, old, the size of a deck of cards, accurate to within half a knot. She ran her range card for the canyon's narrowest point, made her elevation marks. Then she put the notebook away and waited. She was good at waiting. 5 years of being someone who didn't exist had required a refined relationship with waiting. With the specific patience of a person who has learned that the next thing will arrive when it arrives, and not before, and that tension in the interim costs more than it earns. Through the scope at 081 the dust rose. Combing the convoy materialized in segments as it rounded the canyon's first bend. 32 vehicles, she counted them, confirmed. The lead pickup had a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, and a man standing in it. Tactical gear too fitted and too clean for a local fighter, command element. The second vehicle, a communications truck, antenna array clearly visible on the roof. Third, a flatbed carrying a crew-served weapon, 2-man crew already in position. Lena slowed her breathing, in hold. Out the world narrowed to the scope's circle, the math of distance and wind and air density, and the specific way a bullet lost velocity over 1,400 meters. She'd done this calculation 10,000 times, in training, in operations, alone on hillsides in the dark with nothing but the wind and the target and the specific responsibility of the shot. She didn't think about the responsibility now. She just did the math range, 1,412 meters, wind, east-northeast, steady at 9 knots, gusting variable temperature, dropping as the sun cleared the ridge. Air thinning, she adjusted. 1 click up. Half click right. The lead vehicle commander raised binoculars, scanning the ridgeline, looking for exactly what she was, in exactly the place she was. He didn't find her. She squeezed, the rifle gave its controlled exhalation. The round traveled 1,400 meters in just over a second and a half. The commander's binoculars fell, then the commander, below the convoy reacted. Vehicles braking, men scrambling, radio chatter bleeding into the open air even at this distance. Exactly the chaos she'd calculated for. Exactly the window she needed. She was already on the second shot. The communications truck driver jerked his wheel at the wrong moment. Instinct, hearing something, sensing something, the animal part of the human brain that knew before the thinking part caught up. She led the adjustment, compensated for the new angle, and put the round through the windshield at the frame junction above the driver's door. The truck swerved hard, caught a rock formation at the canyon edge, rolled. The antenna array shattered across the canyon floor. Third shot. The heavy weapons gunner was swinging his platform toward the ridgeline, searching. He had a general direction. He didn't have her. She took him before the barrel completed its arc. She relocated immediately. 15 feet left. New shadow, new angle, new problem for anyone trying to triangulate. Through the scope, she watched the convoy come apart, not with satisfaction, not with anything that had a name she'd use in daylight. Just observation, confirmation, the recognition of a thing going the way the math had said it would go, vehicles reversing into each other. Men firing at the ridgeline in all directions, some toward her, most not. The specific chaos of an organized force suddenly without its organizing intelligence. Actual, this is Callahan. She kept her voice flat. Professional, the way she kept everything during the work. Primary targets down. Convoy is disorganized. No lateral exit available in the canyon. Estimate 40% combat effectiveness remaining and falling. Bowman's voice came back tight and controlled in the way voices got tight and controlled when someone was managing relief and keeping it out of their tone. Copy. Air assets are 40 minutes out. Can you hold them? She chambered another round, affirmative. For the next 38 minutes, she became the reason the convoy could not reorganize. Every time a command element tried to form up, she removed it. Engine blocks on the vehicles that had managed to partially turn. Tires on anything that looked like it might establish a new position. She didn't take every shot available. She took the shots that mattered, the ones that changed what was possible for them. She relocated after every third shot. New position, new shadow, new angle. They never found her. When the first Apache came over the northern ridge, the convoy was already finished. Vehicles abandoned in the canyon below. Survivors on foot, moving back the way they'd come. The helicopters finished what the math had started. Callahan, this is actual. Air assets are engaged. Return to base. She didn't respond immediately. Just watched through the scope as the helicopters worked. Watched the desert that had been a threat 40 minutes ago, resume being a desert. Watched the specific aftermath of a fight that had been decided before the other side understood it was happening. She thought about the 12 people who had gone into a different canyon 5 years ago. She thought about how the math had worked then too, just not in their direction. She thought, this is not the same thing. Don't make it the same thing, Callahan. Returning to base, she disassembled the rifle, collected her brass, left nothing on the ridge that said she'd been there. The walk back took 40 minutes. The sun fully up now, pressing down on the desert with its usual lack of interest in human scheduling. Her hip complained the whole way. It always did. The old injury from an operation whose name she didn't use anymore, in a canyon whose coordinates she still sometimes woke up knowing. She let it complain. Pain was information. She already knew what it was telling her. She got back to the base as the celebration was starting. The specific laughter of people who had been terrified, and then not been terrified, and were now burning through the chemical aftermath of it. Cigarettes and handshakes and voices pitched too loud. The way voices got when the body was still running on a frequency the situation no longer required. She walked past all of it, found the equipment shed, found her corner, sat down with her back to the wall and her rifle across her lap, and started breaking it down for cleaning. Aldridge found her 10 minutes later. He stood in the doorway like he was waiting for permission to enter a space that had invisible rules he wasn't sure he understood. Which was, she thought, at least accurate. He didn't lead with anything, didn't perform. Just came in and sat on the ammunition crate across from her, and was quiet for a moment. I said it was impossible, he said. You weren't entirely wrong. It was at the edge. You made it look like there was no edge. That's different from there being no edge. He looked at his hands. My sister, Brianna. 3rd year pre-med. She wants to do emergency medicine. He said it the way people said things they'd been carrying for a while and had decided, for once, not to carry alone. When I thought today was going to go the other way, when I was looking at those numbers and the math was bad, I wasn't thinking about the mission. I was thinking about her graduation, whether I'd be there for it. Callahan ran a patch through the barrel. But I will be there, Aldridge said, because today worked. Because you were here, he held out his hand. I was wrong about you from the moment you got off that truck. I said things I shouldn't have. I'm sorry for that. She looked at his hand, then shook it. Once, brief. Let it go. Forget it, she said. I'd rather not. He stood, easy about it. Not pushing, just honest. The guys are calling you Ghost because you came out of nowhere and did something that doesn't have a rational explanation. He moved toward the door. I don't know your real name. Don't need to. But whatever it is, thank you. Just thank you, he left. She sat with the rifle 30 seconds. She allowed herself exactly that long in which her face did what it wanted to do, which was complicated and not particularly composed, and not something she would have let anyone witness. Then she wiped it. Put it away. Went back to the rifle. Bowman found the envelope when he got back from rounds 23-47 hours, the base settling into its overnight rhythms. Guard rotations, radio checks, the particular quiet of a place that had survived something and was now processing the surviving. The envelope sat in the center of his desk, plain, no markings, his name in block letters on the front. The kind of printing that was deliberate in its anonymity. Not a handwriting you could identify, not a font you could trace. He opened it. Inside, a single printed page. A screenshot. Internal communications. Ashburn's own patrol scheduling system, with tomorrow's routes marked and annotated in ways that the scheduling system didn't produce. Someone had added notations by hand. Times, positions, coverage gaps. Someone had been feeding Ashburn's operational patterns out. And at the bottom of the page, handwritten in ink that had dried slightly smeared, like it had been written quickly and folded quickly and delivered quickly. Bravo Wraith didn't die because of bad intel. Someone inside the system sold them. That person knows she survived. Ashburn is their second attempt. This is not over. No signature. Bowman read it twice, set it down on the desk, looked at the door of the operations center, threw it the base. 37 other people. Guard positions manned, night watch cycling. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Except someone in this base, or someone with access to it, had sent detailed patrol information out. Not after tonight's fight. Before. This was pre-existing. This had been happening, which meant tonight's convoy hadn't been random. Which meant whatever was coming next wasn't random either. He folded the paper, put it in his breast pocket, where it sat like the specific weight of a thing that changed the shape of everything around it. Looked out toward the eastern tower, dark against the stars now, empty. She was in quarters somewhere, or not sleeping, or on the roof of some other structure he hadn't thought to check. He picked up his phone, put it back down. Finch had told him to trust her, had said there were things he didn't need to know tonight, and he had spent 19 years learning that Margot Finch's instincts about what needed to be held close and what needed to be aired were usually right. Usually. But someone had put that envelope on his desk. Someone in this base, or close enough to it to have access, was trying to tell him something that they couldn't say out loud. Which meant the threat wasn't only in the canyon, it was already inside the wire. He turned off the overhead light, left the desk lamp burning, and sat in the operations center of Ashburn, New Mexico. With a dead woman's secret in his head and an anonymous warning in his pocket, listening to the desert, and trying to determine the shape of what was coming before it arrived. The stars outside didn't offer anything. They rarely did. But morning would come, and when it did, he would start pulling the thread. The morning after a battle had its own specific weight. Not quiet, never quiet on a forward operating base. Generators running, radio traffic cycling through its rotations. Someone always moving metal against metal at a volume that suggested they had never once in their life paused to consider other people's nervous systems. The smell of burned fuel still drifting in from the motor pool, where 2 vehicles had caught secondary fire during the night's assault and been dealt with. But underneath all of it, under the noise and the movement, and the particular restlessness of people who had been scared and were now on the other side of that, and didn't quite know what to do with themselves yet. A silence, the kind that lived between what almost happened and what did. The kind that pressed on the chest at odd moments and reminded you that the math had been bad last night and had only resolved in your favor because of something you couldn't fully account for. Bowman had been awake since 0400. He'd slept for maybe 90 minutes in the chair behind his desk, which didn't count as sleeps, so much as a temporary suspension of consciousness that left him no more rested but at least vertical. The patrol schedules were done. The equipment manifest was done. The casualty report from the overnight perimeter check, no casualties, which still struck him as slightly improbable given the circumstances, was done. The envelope was in his breast pocket. He'd read it 4 more times through the night. It hadn't changed. It still said the same thing in the same smeared ink. Bravo Wraith didn't die because of bad intel. Someone inside the system sold them. That person knows she survived. Ashburn is their second attempt. This is not over. He'd spent the quiet hours trying to work the logic of it. Who in this base had the knowledge to write that note? Who had the access to plant it on his desk without being seen? Who had motive to warn him rather than stay silent? The list was either very long or very short, depending on which question he started with. And none of the answers he arrived at were comfortable. At 0530, he found her on the firing range, not shooting. standing at the line with the rifle held loosely at her side. Looking downrange at targets, she wasn't engaging, the way people sometimes stood in front of something they were thinking about, rather than looking at. The morning light was still low and orange, hitting the desert from the side the way it did in that first hour, when everything cast long shadows, and the heat hadn't started its daily argument with everyone's patience. She hadn't heard him come up, or she had and had decided he was allowed to approach. With her, he was no longer certain which. "You sleep?" he asked. Enough, which meant no. He let it go, because he'd gotten roughly the same amount, and they both knew that the question hadn't really been about sleep. He stood beside her, looked downrange. The targets at 200, 300, 400 meters stood in the early light looking patient in the way targets always looked patient, which was one of the fundamental dishonest things about training ranges. Real targets did not wait. "I need to ask you something," he said. "You're going to ask it regardless." The Night Bravo Wraith went in, he said. Careful, each word placed the intelligence failure. "Did you ever determine where it originated?" A long silence. She raised the rifle, checked something on the scope adjustment, lowered it. The motion of someone who needed something to do with their hands while their mind worked through a decision. "Why?" she said. He reached into his breast pocket, held out the envelope. She took it. "Read it once." Twice her face did nothing at all throughout this, which was itself a form of response. She handed it back. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "My desk." "Between 2100 and 0600, someone on this base, or someone with access." He put the envelope back in his pocket. "I need to know if it's true." She looked downrange, raised the rifle again, sighted on the 400-meter target without pulling the trigger. "I know the failure was deliberate," she said. "The precision of someone choosing every word individually, picking each one up, examining it, setting it down. I know it wasn't random. I know we walked into a position that had been prepared for us." Specifically, she lowered the rifle. "Beyond that, I have suspicions. Not evidence. Tell me the suspicions." "No, Callahan. Commander." She looked at him directly, the full weight of whatever lived behind those eyes, which was considerable. "You have access credentials being used by someone other than you. You have operational information leaving this base through an unauthorized channel. That is your problem right now. That is the thing you can actually do something about." She turned back to the range. "My suspicions about what happened in a canyon 5 years ago are not going to help you solve the problem that is happening right now. Today in this base," he looked at her. She was right. She was infuriating, and she was right. And both of those things were simultaneously true in a way he was going to need more coffee to fully appreciate. "Stay available," he said. She fired. The 400-meter target acquired a new hole in the exact center. She chambered another round without looking down. "Where would I go?" The intelligence brief came in at 900, and it rewrote every calculation Bowman had been running. Hostile forces had not withdrawn after the canyon failure. They had repositioned, consolidated. The satellite imagery on his screen showed cluster after cluster of confirmed positions in the northern mountain range. Not the scattered retreat of a force that had lost its momentum, but the deliberate regrouping of one that had lost a battle and was preparing for something else. Something larger. The kind of something that came with a specific shape when you'd been doing this long enough to recognize it. 200 fighters, minimum. Heavy weapons. Vehicle-mounted. Staging in the mountains with the patience of people who understood that patience was a weapon too. Reinforcement request submitted at 600. Response received at 091 FEV, ETA. 68 hours. 68 hours. Bowman sat with that number for a moment and let it be what it was. He called his senior staff in at 1,000. Laid it out without decoration. The numbers were the numbers. The timeline was the timeline. He had 38 people and a base that the enemy now had detailed intelligence on. Patrol schedules, defensive positions, coverage gaps. Someone had given them a map of Ashburn's vulnerabilities and they were going to use it. The room was quiet when he finished. The kind of quiet that happened when people were doing math they didn't like the answer to. He dismissed everyone to their positions, told them to expect contact within 36 hours. Told them to be ready before that. Rourke stayed behind. She waited until the tent emptied. Then she set a photograph on his desk. Her phone, screen up, showing an image she'd captured at close range in uncertain light. A device. Military issue. Not Ashburn's inventory. A communications relay of the kind that was used for monitoring and signal interception, not for transmitting location data. And on the screen of the device, a message thread, partial. The last message received, the sender's information cut off at the edge of the frame. But the recipient field was visible, a name he recognized. Bowman looked at it for a long time, then looked at Roark, where, he said, equipment storage, secondary tent. Under the floor panel behind the generator housing, her voice was level, professional, the face of a soldier delivering a report that she understood was significant. I found it during the pre-dawn sweep. I didn't touch it. I photographed what was visible and left it in place. Who else knows? You, me. That's it, he nodded. Looked at the photograph again. Not a word, not to anyone, not yet. Understood. She moved toward the tent flap. Stopped, sir. There's something else. He waited. Callahan. Rourke said the name carefully, like she was handling it. I've been watching her since she got here. The way she moves through this base. The way she checks exits when she enters a room. The way she positions herself with sightlines to every approach. She paused. I know what that looks like. I watched my brother do it for 3 years after he came back. You build a kind of hypervigilance. That's the clinical word. But it's more specific than that. It's what happens when your threat assessment instinct gets broken open and never heals correctly. Bowman was quiet. She's not here because she wants to fight, Rourke said. She's here because staying away was worse. And whatever she came back for, she hasn't found it yet. She looked at him. I don't know what that means for us operationally. I just thought you should have it. She left. Bowman sat alone with the photograph and Roark's words and the 68-hour number and the particular weight of a morning that kept adding items to a list he hadn't asked for. The conversations happened the way they happened, not by arrangement, but by the specific gravity that pulled people toward each other in the hours before something significant. Aldridge found Callahan in the equipment shed at midday. She was cleaning the rifle with the methodical focus of someone for whom the ritual of it was not separate from the purpose. Same sequence every time. Parts laid out in precise order on the cloth, oil and solvent, the small brushes arranged by size. He sat on the ammunition crate. The same one he'd used the day before, like he'd claimed it. I called Brianna this morning, he said. She didn't look up. Told her I had a close one. Didn't give her details. She cried a little and tried not to let me hear it. He looked at his hands, turned them over. The hands of a 25-year-old who had already asked them to do more than most people would in a lifetime. She's got her clinical rotation coming up. 8 weeks. She's been afraid of it for months. Keep saying she's not ready, he paused. She's ready. She's more ready than she knows. She just can't see it yet from where she's standing. Callahan ran a patch through the barrel, checked it against the light. Ran another, my point, Aldridge said, is that she gets to figure that out. She gets to do those 8 weeks and discover she's more capable than she thought. She gets that because yesterday worked. He looked at Callahan. Because you were here and you did what you did. Silence. She was quiet long enough that he might have thought she wasn't going to respond. But she said, she'll be good at it. How do you know? Because you came back for her. Because she matters to you that specifically. People who are loved like that, concretely, exactly the way you talk about her, they tend to be worth it. She set down the barrel, picked up the bolt. She'll be good at it. Aldridge was quiet for a moment, then he said, you're not as difficult to talk to as you want people to think. She looked at him, the expression she used when something surprised her, and she wasn't going to admit it. Don't push it, Corporal, he almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. He left her with the rifle and the solvent and the ordered quiet of the shed, and she sat there for a moment after the sound of his boots faded, holding a bolt she'd already cleaned twice, thinking about a woman she'd never met, who was going to be a doctor someday, and didn't know yet that she was ready. Rourke found her an hour later, didn't come with a reason, just sat down across from her in the mess tent where Callahan had taken her corner again. Back to the wall, sightlines to both doors, and poured herself coffee and was quiet for a moment first, which Callahan respected. My brother Eric, Roark said. Staff sergeant. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Kuwait. He came back the 3rd time different in a way that didn't have a clean name. She turned her cup in her hands. He wasn't broken. I want to say that clearly because people always want to say broken, like it's a simpler story that way. He wasn't broken. He was present in 2 places at once, here and somewhere else simultaneously, and the somewhere else took more and more of him over time, until there wasn't enough left of the here part to hold on. Callahan looked at her. He died 5 years ago, Roark said. The VA called it cardiac event, stress-related. His friends called it what it was. She paused, drank her coffee, set it down. I volunteered for this posting 6 months after. My CO said I was running from something. He wasn't wrong. But you can run towards something at the same time as away from it. Those aren't mutually exclusive. A silence. The kind that didn't require anything from either of them. I recognize the way you move through this base, Roark said. The exits, the cover positions. The way you put yourself between other people and the door without making it look like you're doing it. She looked at Callahan steadily. I watched Eric do that for 3 years. It's not a flaw. It's what's left after you've been in enough rooms where the door was the most important thing in it. Callahan said nothing. I'm not asking for your story, Roark said. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that someone in this base has seen that before and doesn't think it needs fixing. She stood, picked up her cup. You did good yesterday. Let people tell you that without making them work so hard for it. She left. Callahan sat with her coffee, and the particular feeling of having been seen by someone who had the equipment to see accurately and the grace to not make a performance of it. She didn't know what to do with that, so she finished her coffee and went back to work. The staff meeting happened at 1400 in the operations tent. Maps on every surface. Satellite imagery of the mountain staging areas. Numbers that Bowman presented without softening, because his people deserved the actual picture, not a managed version of it. 200 fighters. 68 hours until reinforcement. 38 people currently operational at Ashburn. The math was the math. Callahan wasn't invited. She came anyway. Stewed in the doorway until Roark caught Bowman's eye, and Bowman gave the half-nod that meant, leave it. She waited until the presentation was done, until the room had absorbed the numbers and was sitting with them. Then she moved to the map table. Nobody stopped her, which was itself a measure of how much the last 20 hours had changed things. You're preparing for a defensive engagement, she said. Not an accusation, a diagnosis. We're outnumbered 3-1 with no air cover for, I understand the math. You're digging in, fortifying, waiting for them to bring the fight to you. She looked at the satellite imagery, the mountain staging areas, the single supply route threading through the valley from the north. That math doesn't work. They have the numbers and they have the time. Every hour they wait, their position strengthens. Every hour you wait, yours weakens, she pointed. Their supply depot. Northern foothills here, single access route. Everything they need to sustain a prolonged assault moves through this valley. We don't have the manpower for an offensive operation, Bowman said. You don't need manpower. She didn't look up from the map. One person. Hit the depot, destroy the supplies, force them to respond to a threat behind their own lines. They either assault immediately with whatever they have on hand, which means they hit you before they're ready, disorganized, without resupply, or they pull back to secure the depot, which buys you the time you need. She looked at him. It's the only move that changes their equation instead of just responding to it. The room was quiet, Aldridge said. That's a solo raid into confirmed hostile territory with no backup and no extraction. Yes, that's... He stopped himself. He'd learned something yesterday about the words he used when he thought something was impossible. Who would even do that? I would. Simple. The same way she said everything that was true. I volunteer. Those are different words than you're sending someone. Bowman looked at her for a long moment. He'd known, he thought, since she stepped off that truck, that it was going to come to something like this, that whatever she was, whatever she'd been, whatever she'd survived, it was going to require something from him, that he wasn't going to be entirely comfortable giving, because the alternative was to say no and watch the math of this situation continue to compound. If I authorize this, he said, you go in alone. No communication support once you're past the ridge, no extraction protocol. If you get into trouble, I'll get myself out of it, and I need something in return. She waited. Your name, he said, your real one. Not Callahan, not whatever's on the temporary assignment orders. The actual name you were born with, a silence that had weight in it. She looked at the map, then at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not opening exactly, but a decision. The internal arrival at a place she'd been circling for a while. Lena Voss, she said, quiet, certain, like setting down something she'd been carrying in both hands for a long time. I was team leader of Bravo Wraith. The room was very still. Bowman kept his face exactly where it was, but his hand flat on the table, pressed down fractionally harder. Because he'd spent the night with the casualty list. He'd read every name on it. And Lena Voss was on that list with a death certificate and a forensic report, and a grave marker in a national cemetery that he now understood was empty. Someone had built her a perfect death. The only person he knew with the clearance and the connections and the reasons to do that at that level was Margot Finch. Move out, Bowman said to the room. Positions as briefed. Double the south wall coverage after 1800. The tent emptied. He and Lena were alone with the maps. Come back, he said. He said it the way he'd said things that mattered throughout 19 years of doing this work. Plainly, without ceremony. Because the things that actually mattered rarely benefited from ceremony. That's an order. She looked at him. The full weight of whatever she carried for just a moment, visible on her face. Not hidden, not managed. Just there. I'll do my best, she said. Your best has been genuinely remarkable so far. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. Something earlier than a smile. The thing that happened in a face before it decided whether to smile or not. Don't jinx it, Commander. She left. He stood alone with the maps and the satellite imagery, and the 68-hour number, and the name Lena Voss, which was the name of a dead woman who had just walked out of his operations tent to go blow up a weapons depot by herself. He had exactly no idea what to do with any of this, so he did what he always did. He went back to work, and he told himself that she would come back, and he told himself he believed that. And mostly he did. She left at 1800, kit stripped to minimum, sidearm, demolitions pack, 4 blocks of C4, remote detonators, det cord, 2 liters of water, 4 protein bars, no body armor. Weight was the enemy of speed. And speed was the thing that kept her alive more consistently than anything she could strap to her chest. Bowman met her at the gate, handed her a radio the size of a deck of cards. Check in every 6 hours. Miss one window, I assume you're compromised. He paused. The depot coordinates are here. He showed her the handheld. Intel says 10 to 12 guards. Lightly defended. Intel is usually wrong, I know. Which is why I'm saying, if it looks significantly different from what we're expecting, I'll adapt. He looked at her. In the last light of the evening, with the desert going orange and purple behind her, she looked exactly like what she was. A person who had decided to do a necessary thing that most people couldn't do and was very quiet about all of it, Lena. She stopped, not at her name, at the way he said it, specific, real. The name of an actual person and not an operational asset. Come back, he said again. Because he'd said it before and he was going to say it again. That's not a request. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that he thought she might say something that was different from anything she'd said so far. Long enough that he thought some door might open. I'll be back before the trouble starts, she said, and walked into the dark. She moved through the mountains for 4 hours, terrain that was indifferent to human logistics. Loose scree that shifted underfoot without warning. Elevation changes that required 3-point contact and the specific concentration that left no room for anything except the next handhold. The moon was new, barely a sliver. Good. Darkness was an ally she'd been working with for long enough that she trusted it. Her hip protested every steep grade. Old injury, canyon, she didn't name. Never healed correctly, never would. She let it protest and kept moving. At 2200, she keyed the radio. First check-in, position secure, no contact. On schedule, Bowman's response came back smaller than she expected, attenuated by distance and terrain. She clicked off and kept climbing. The depot sat in a shallow valley, exactly where the intelligence said it would, which was unusual enough that she spent an extra 40 minutes making sure she was right before she believed it. She observed from 700 meters, 1 full hour, counted 11 personnel, one more than intel suggested, noted the vehicle-mounted weapon nobody had mentioned, noted the ammunition stockpile that was conservatively 3 times the estimated volume, but the guards were what she'd hoped for. Comfortable, clustered, smoking in pairs, moving in patterns so predictable she could have set her watch by them. These were people who had been protecting something they didn't expect anyone to come for. The specific vulnerability of a position that had never been tested. She waited for the shift change, the 3-minute window when accountability lapsed and attention scattered. Then she moved. 200 meters, 100, 50. A guard passed so close she could smell his cigarette. She pressed herself against a boulder and stopped breathing and waited while his radio squawked, and he answered and turned and walked away. She exhaled, kept moving, the first charge under the main ammunition stack, the second at the fuel drums, the third beneath the vehicle with the mounted gun. She was placing the fourth at the base of the communications array when someone behind her said something sharp and immediate and alarmed. Young voice. Young face when she turned. 19, maybe 20. A guard who had come from a direction the rotation didn't account for. His rifle was coming up with the particular speed of someone who was frightened and translating that into action. She drew her sidearm and fired twice, suppressed. Quiet enough, not quiet enough, shouts from across the depot. 2 voices, then 4, then the general alarm of a camp discovering something had gone wrong in the dark. She ran, away from the depot, toward the ridge, toward the elevation advantage and the ground she'd memorized on the way in. Bullets cracked past, behind her first, then to her right as someone found a better angle. She didn't return fire, just ran, the hip screaming. The adrenaline doing what adrenaline did, which was defer the accounting to later. 30 meters to cover, 20. Something hit her right side with the specific force of a thing that was going to require attention. She stumbled, did not fall, caught herself, kept running. The entry wound was above the hip. She could feel the location without looking. Through and through, probably. The exit would tell her more, and the exit could wait. She made the boulder field, pressed in. Sustained fire tore up the space behind her. She pulled the detonator from her vest. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the thing that happened to hands when a body was doing rapid physiological math about blood loss and adrenaline ratios. She pressed the button. The valley turned white, the ammunition first. The concussive wave was something she felt in her teeth, and behind her eyes, and in every rib simultaneously. Then the fuel drums, adding orange to the white, the light so sudden and total it turned night into something else. Then the vehicles. Secondary explosions cascading through the depot in a sequence that was almost musical in its progression, each one feeding the next. The shock wave arrived like a shove from a very large hand. She covered her head. Debris rained down, metal, rock. Things she didn't look at closely. When she looked up, the depot was gone. She keyed the radio. Ghost to actual. Her voice was steadier than her hands. She was proud of that. Mission complete. Depot destroyed. She breathed through the next part. I'm compromised. Took fire during exfil. Heading for extraction point Alpha. But actual it's. The injury is not nothing. Bowman's voice came back immediately and with a sharpness she recognized as someone managing controlled alarm. How bad? Through and through, right side above the hip. I'm mobile. I can make Alpha negative. We're sending. You have no one to send. She was already moving away from the burning valley, toward the ridge, toward the long walk back. You have 38 people and a 200-person assault incoming. You do not pull anyone off that line for me, Lena. I'll be at the gate before it starts. She clicked the radio off before he could respond, and walked. The chase lasted 3 hours. They had vehicles. She had elevation, and the map she'd memorized, and the specific knowledge of someone who had spent the walk in memorizing terrain, features not because she expected to need them for a retreat, but because she always memorized terrain features. It was a habit. It had sat in her safe a number of times that she'd stopped counting. She led them wrong twice, into dead ends, across a ridge section that broke an axle on the vehicle stupid enough to follow. She could hear them behind her, engines, voices, the frustrated sounds of pursuit that had overestimated its own competence. But she was slowing, blood loss was a tax, and the body had a finite account. Twice she caught herself starting to sit down. Both times she stood back up before the decision fully formed. The third time was on a scree slope, and she didn't catch herself. She went down hard. 20 feet of controlled slide that became uncontrolled at the bottom, depositing her at a flat section of rock, with a force that announced itself in every existing injury simultaneously, plus several new locations she hadn't expected to hear from. She lay there, looked at stars that were doing the spin that stars did, when your blood pressure had dropped to a point that your visual cortex filed under. Concerning. Get up. Her body submitted detailed notes about why that was an unreasonable request at this time. She thought about Bravo Wraith. About 12 people who had trusted her assessment of the intelligence. About 3 weeks in a canyon afterward, making herself into something that breathed but didn't move, while the world above her determined that nobody had survived. She had survived by disappearing. She was not going to disappear on this hillside. Bowman needed to know that the enemy was coming with everything they had left. Angry, stripped of their supply line, desperate in the specific way that desperation made organized forces into something more dangerous and less predictable than they'd been before. She rolled onto her stomach, got one knee under her, then both, then standing, swaying, but vertical, she walked. Dawn came up ugly, the sky the color of something that had been through something. Orange and bruised purple and the particular pale grey of early light that hadn't decided yet whether the day was going to be survivable. She saw the lights of Ashburn at 0547. 2 clicks out, maybe less. The base sitting in the desert like a decision someone had made and was committed to regardless of what the landscape thought about it. Her radio crackled. Ghost, actual. Current position, I can see you. A pause. We're tracking hostile vehicles. They're moving. Multiple columns, I know. They're coming with what's left and they're coming angry. No supply line, no patience. She kept walking. 1 foot, then the other. The hip had stopped shouting and moved into the specific quiet of a thing that had made its point and was now waiting to be addressed. Do not pull anyone off the line. I'll be at the east gate in 10 minutes. How hurt are you? Truthfully, she looked at the base, at the lights, at the east gate where a guard she could barely see was watching the approach. Hurt enough that I need to be done with this conversation, she said. Not hurt enough that today's over. She made it to the outer wall as the first mortar hit. The ground shook. Orange bloomed from the motor pool. She pressed herself against the gate station wall and felt the blast wave move through her like a reminder that her body had been through too much today and was going to have opinions about it later. The gate guard was young. His face cycled through several emotions very quickly. Ma'am, your bleeding metal kit now. She took it when he produced it, hands steadier than they had any right to be. Go, south wall, he went. She field-dressed the wound against the gate station wall. Quick. Functional. Enough. The morphine in the kit did its job, which was not to eliminate the pain but to translate it into a language she could work with. Then she checked the rifle scopes intact. Ammunition sufficient. Inside the wire, controlled chaos had its own rhythm. Bowman's voice cutting through everything on the radio, calm, precise, the voice of someone who had committed to a course of action and was executing it cleanly. She could hear where the line was holding and where it wasn't, could hear the specific frequencies of a defensive posture under pressure. She found Aldridge behind a burned Humvee on the east approach, shoulder-wrapped, still fighting. 3 contacts pushing his position from the north, using the vehicle wreckage for cover, working a textbook flanking move that was going to work in about 45 more seconds. She dropped the first one from 60 meters, dropped the second before Aldridge had processed that someone was there. The third turned and she put him down before he completed the turn. Aldridge spun, saw her. His face did the thing where several things tried to happen at once and none of them made it fully to the surface. "Ghost, you look. I know." She picked up the AK from the second contact. Heavier than she liked. Less precise than she required. It would do. "Can you move?" "Yes." "Then move." Together they held the east approach for 22 minutes. She burned through 2 magazines doing something that was not sniping, not elegant, not the controlled, calculated work she preferred. Just the raw business of keeping people alive by putting rounds between them and the things trying to kill them. It was loud and close, and her side screamed the whole time, and she told it to wait. The west line buckled at 0643. She heard it on the radio, heard Bowman call for fallback to secondary positions, heard the math in his voice, which was, "We are absorbing this, but we cannot absorb this indefinitely." She looked at the water tower. 112 feet, rusted, old, the kind of structure that city engineers condemned and military engineers worked around because removing it was lower priority than everything else. But from the top, unobstructed sight lines to every corner of Ashburn's perimeter, she could see the entire battle from up there, could coordinate every position simultaneously, could be the eyes that the defense needed. She would also be completely visible from every position outside the wire. She calculated this clearly, without flinching. Then she slung the AK, picked up her rifle and walked toward it. "Ghost," Aldridge on the radio. "Ghost, that tower has no cover. You'll be completely, I'll have eyes on everything." She reached the base, started climbing. The ladder was older than the war, groaned under her weight. She climbed anyway. "Get Rock on Channel 2. I need someone to relay fire missions. They will see you up there." Good, 1 rung, then another, 50 feet. The base spreading out below her. "Then they'll be shooting at me instead of you." She didn't wait for his response. 75 feet. The tower swaying in the morning wind in a way that was either normal structural flex or a precursor to catastrophic failure, and she was choosing to believe the former. 100 feet. The top. She dropped into position. Brought the rifle up, and the battle came into focus, the way battles came into focus from elevation. Not as chaos, but as a problem with a shape. She could see the 3 breach points simultaneously, could see which ones were being reinforced, and which ones were about to give. Could see the command elements, trying to coordinate from positions they thought were concealed and were not. All stations. "This is Ghost," her voice on the radio, steady, absolute. "I have full field visibility. Give me your targets, Bowman. Ghost, get down from there. You are completely exposed, I know. They will kill you. Then they better be fast." She found her first target. Fired. Machine gun team at the motor pool breach is down. South team, push that gap now. A beat then. Copy. South team move. She became the eyes. Every push she saw before it landed. Every command element, trying to organize, she took apart before it finished organizing. She called fire missions and dropped individual targets, painted the entire battle in real time for 38 people who were fighting without the ability to see past their own positions. Bullets came back. Of course they did. She was standing top of a water tower in plain sight. She was the most visible thing on the battlefield by an enormous margin. Rounds sparked off the tank behind her. One grazed her left shoulder. Another took a piece of her hood. She filed these under the same category as the hip and the side wound and everything else that was waiting for after. She kept calling. Then she saw the man by the northern breach, standing beside a technical, clean tactical gear, command posture, gesturing to 3 separate teams with the specific authority of someone who had spent years being listened to and expected to continue to be. If he completed that coordination, the 3 teams would work in concert, and the west wall would not survive the next 4 minutes. Fringe. 1,100 meters, wind gusting, unpredictable thermals off the burning vehicles below scope, functional. Left shoulder, recently grazed, arm compensating. Right side. She was not thinking about the right side. 1,100 meters with compromised stability and variable wind. She breathed, felt the wind. Felt the specific mathematics of it. Not calculated consciously, not run through a formula, just felt, the way she felt it after 20,000 rounds fired in conditions worse than this. She adjusted for the gust pattern, adjusted for the elevation change between her position and his. adjusted for the way her left arm was compensating, and introducing a small and consistent error that she could correct for if she accounted for it. She fired. The man went down, and the assault wavered, stalled. The three teams stopped mid-coordination, their organizing intelligence suddenly absent, the specific fragility of a plan that had depended on one person suddenly visible. "Push," Bowman said on the radio. One word. Total certainty. Everyone push. Now the defense became the offense. She watched it from 112 feet up, watched 38 people who had been absorbing punishment all morning find a seam in what had seemed like an overwhelming force and drive through it, watched the enemy break, not slowly, suddenly. The way things that had been holding together broke when the right piece was removed. She was watching it when she saw the mortar tubes, all of them turning toward her. She had, at the outside, 5 seconds. The ladder was 40 feet away. She looked up the maintenance hatch on the water tank. Open. Left open by whoever had last serviced this thing, which had clearly been some time ago, because the hatch was rusted in the open position, and had been for longer than she'd been at this base. 1 second gone. She jumped backward off the catwalk into the open hatch, hit water, cold, total, immediate. The world above went orange and white, and then muffled. She heard the mortars the way you heard things underwater, translated, reduced, arriving from a direction that wasn't clear. She felt them, felt the tank shudder, felt shrapnel punch through the steel skin in multiple places, each impact a new voice in the metal around her. Felt the structure make its decision. She surfaced, gasping. The tank was flooding through the shrapnel holes. The tower was leaning. She could feel it in the water, the tilt, the specific physics of a structure that had committed to falling. She pulled herself to the hatch, through it, dropped onto the catwalk outside, hit hard, grabbed for the railing. The railing gave way. She grabbed the support beam. The tower gave a sound like everything wrong happening at once. She climbed down the outside of it, the way she'd climbed up, except the outside was now at 45 degrees and moving, and the handholds were changing positions as the structure twisted. She moved by feel, by the muscle memory of 1,000 training exercises and 12 operations, and the specific commitment of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that stopping was not a category she operated in. She hit the ground as the tower completed its fall, metal and concrete and dust and the sound of something large becoming many smaller things. She lay in the wreckage, looked up at a square of pale morning sky visible through the twisted debris above her. Her hands were empty. Rifle gone somewhere in the fall, radio gone. The borrowed AK somewhere behind her on the catwalk she'd started from. But she was breathing, and the gunfire, it was getting farther away, which meant the push was working, which meant they were running. Hands found her, voices, Rourke and Aldridge pulling her clear of the debris, with the efficient care of people who had been in enough bad situations to know how to move an injured person without asking too many questions. Bowman's face appeared above her. Suit. Dried blood that wasn't his, mostly. Eyes doing something she didn't have a name for. The look of someone who had spent several hours expecting one outcome and was adjusting in real time to a different one. "You're alive," he said, which struck her as an unusual thing to say. "Were you expecting otherwise?" Frankly, he said it with the flat honesty of someone past the point of managing his responses. "Yes." She looked at the sky. "Did we win?" she said. "They're running. Air support is 2 minutes out." "Good." She closed her eyes. Not an unconscious present, just done with the part that required her eyes to be open. "Then it worked, Lena." His voice was different now, not the commander's voice, the other one. The one he used when he was talking to her rather than at a situation. "Medic. Now medic." Around her the base was breathing again, and she let herself, for the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate, be someone other people were responsible for keeping alive for the next few minutes. It was strange. It was also, she thought, in the last clear moment before everything got softer and more distant and less immediate. Exactly what it felt like when you'd done everything you came to do, and it was enough. She woke to white ceiling, white light from a fixture that hummed at a frequency specifically calibrated, it seemed, to prevent real sleep. The antiseptic smell of a place designed to keep people alive despite physics and circumstance, and sometimes the people themselves. The steady percussion of a monitor that had been tracking her heart rate and had opinions about what it found. Fort Carson Medical Center, Colorado. She knew this because someone had taped a card to the bed rail with her name on it, the false one, Callahan, and the facility name beneath it and the date, which told her she'd been here for 36 hours without being aware of it. Which was fine. The body made its own decisions during that kind of accounting period. She'd learned to trust the process even when she resented the timeline. The first thing she did when she was certain she was actually awake, and not in one of the half-states that had been cycling through the night, she asked for the casualty count. The nurse was young, competent. She had the face of someone who had learned to hold difficult information with professional steadiness and was applying that skill now. "Ma'am, maybe you should wait until tell me." Not loud, not hard, just certain in the way that left no room for protective management. The nurse told her, 6 dead, 19 wounded, 3 of whom were still in the surgical wing. Lena asked for their names. The nurse found the list on her tablet, turned it so Lena could see. Lena read each name aloud, not for the nurse, not for anyone in the room, for the names themselves. She said them slowly enough that each one had space around it, space before it and space after, so nothing ran together, so each person remained distinct in the saying of them. She read all 6. Then she asked for a piece of paper and wrote them down, folded the paper, put it under her pillow, where it sat with the specific weight of something that was not a burden and not a comfort, but simply a fact she had decided to keep close. She was looking at the ceiling when Bowman arrived. He looked like a man who had slept in the chair beside her bed for approximately the same number of hours she'd been unconscious, which turned out to be accurate. The vinyl fold lines were pressed into the side of his face. His uniform was clean. He'd changed at some point, but the tiredness around his eyes was the kind that clean clothes didn't address. He sat down, didn't say anything immediately. She'd noticed over the past several days that he didn't fill silence with noise just because silence existed. It was one of the more useful things about him. 6 people died, she said. Yes, I read their names, I know. He looked at his hands briefly. The nurse told me. He looked up. It could have been everyone. You understand that? The math on that fight, the moment they hit us with full force, the math said we lose. What you did change the outcome. 6 people don't experience the outcome I changed, she said. They experienced the outcome they got. Yes, he didn't argue with it, didn't reframe it, didn't offer the version of this conversation that was designed to make her feel better rather than to be true. Yes, they do. She appreciated that more than she could have explained. They sat in the quiet of the medical room, 2 people who had been present for the same disaster and were carrying their separate portions of it. Outside, Fort Carson continued its business. Helicopters, vehicle engines, the general noise of a military installation that didn't pause for individual reckoning. "Finch is coming," Bowman said finally. Lena went still in the specific way she went still when something required her full internal attention. She's flying in today. She'll present herself as an independent investigator, which means she's coming in her official capacity and expecting the information I have to not exist yet. He paused. Raak's photograph, the device, the name in the recipient field. She doesn't know I have it. Lena looked at the ceiling. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "Put it on the table between us. See what she says." He looked at her carefully. "Is there anything I should know before she arrives? Anything that changes the shape of what I'm walking into?" She thought about this honestly. About 5 years. About Utah and the specific weight of silence that was louder than anything she'd encountered in a forward operating base. About the long math of guilt that didn't resolve, no matter how many times she ran it. "I don't know what she is to me," she said finally. "I've been trying to work that out since you told me her name was on that device." She looked at the ceiling. "Friend, or I don't have the right word. There isn't a word for someone who might have saved your life, and also might have engineered the conditions that made saving your life necessary in the first place." A pause. "I don't know which she is. Maybe she's both," Bowman said. Lena didn't answer, but she stopped looking at the ceiling and looked at the window instead, which was at least a direction change, and the pale Colorado sky outside it offered nothing useful, which was honest. Finch arrived at 1400. She came through the door of the medical room, and in the 3 seconds before she spoke, Lena read her the way she read every space she entered, systematically without apparent effort. 60 years old. Grey hair cut short and worn without any attempt to be anything other than grey. Posture that had spent decades declining to make itself smaller in rooms that expected it to. Civilian clothes, dark blazer, no insignia. Nothing that announced what she was to anyone who hadn't already been briefed. Her eyes went to Bowman first, then to Lena, then to the photograph on the table between them. Raak's photograph, printed and placed there by Bowman 20 minutes before Finch arrived. She stopped 3 seconds. Exactly 3. Then she walked to the chair beside the bed and sat down and placed her hands in her lap and looked at the photograph with the expression of someone who had been carrying a particular weight for a particular length of time and had just been told the carrying was done. "All right," she said, just that Bowman said, "Deputy Director, I'm not going to insult either of you," Finch said. She was looking at Lena, not at Bowman, at Lena specifically, with the directness of someone who had decided that after 5 years the least she owed this woman was eye contact. "The device is mine. The communication channel is mine. I've been using it since before Lena arrived at Ashburn. The room was quiet enough that the monitor's percussion was audible, but I need you to understand what I was using it for." Finch's voice was even, not defensive, precise, the way voices got when someone had been rehearsing a conversation for a long time and had finally arrived at the moment to deliver it. "I was not transmitting Ashburn's operational data to hostile forces. I was monitoring incoming signals, watching to see if anyone was trying to locate Lena through the base's communications infrastructure." Lena said nothing. 5 years ago, Finch said, 3 days before Bravo Wraith went into that canyon, I intercepted a partial communication, encrypted. I spent 48 hours trying to decode enough of it to act on it. Something tightened in her jaw, almost imperceptible, almost. What I decoded told me that someone had transmitted your unit's route, timing, and personnel count to a hostile network. Someone with access to our own systems. She paused. By the time I had enough of the message to identify what it meant and where it had come from, Bravo Wraith was already moving. I couldn't reach the operation in time. I couldn't pull you back. I couldn't warn you through any channel that wasn't already compromised. Silence Bowman from the wall. "Who?" Finch looked at him. Then back at Lena. "Brigadier General Harlan Owens, Pentagon, Weapons Procurement Division." She said the name with the specific weight of a name she had been carrying for 5 years and was now setting down in front of people who could do something with it. Bravo Wraith's final operation produced documentation that implicated him in an unauthorized weapons transfer. Black market, significant scale, ongoing. He needed everyone who'd seen that documentation to disappear. He needed the documentation itself to disappear with them. Bowman said, "He's been monitoring Ashburn since Lena arrived. It took him 3 years to find the thread that told him she'd survived. When he did, he began building a second operation." Finch's hands remained still in her lap. He had access to base credentials through a liaison arrangement with the regional command. He used Bowman's credentials to push operational information out. Patrol schedules, defensive coverage, personnel numbers. He arranged the attacks as cover. He intended for Lena to die in the assault, a casualty of hostile action in an active combat zone, untraceable. She paused. Harmindai Finch continued. He booked travel. He was coming here on the pretext of a routine inspection. He had a plan for the inspection. She didn't elaborate on what the plan was. She didn't need to. Lena had been looking at the window throughout this Colorado sky, the pale, high-altitude blue that existed only above 8,000 feet, and had no opinion about anything happening in the room below it. "He's in custody," Bowman said. Flat statement. FBI detained him at Denver International at 08:30 this morning. Finch reached into her blazer and produced her phone. Set it on the table face up, a photograph. A man in a general's uniform being walked through a processing facility by two federal agents, his face arranged into the specific blankness of someone who had already made their phone call and was waiting for the process to confirm what they believed about their own importance. I contacted the FBI before I boarded my flight. The file I've been building on Owens for 18 months was sufficient for an immediate hold pending investigation. She looked at Lena. I used Ashburn as the circumstance that would force him to move, to make an action that was unambiguous and on record. He wasn't going to stop as long as you were alive and unprotected, and he thought he could reach you quietly. She paused. I used you as the condition that brought him out into the open. I made that decision without your knowledge. I am not going to dress that up. Lena finally looked at her. Did it work? She said. He's in custody. The evidence is substantial. It will take time. Men like Owens have resources and lawyers and the institutional instinct to protect its own. But the documentation is solid and he knows it. Finch held her gaze. Yes, it worked, then it worked. Lena looked back at the window. I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm saying it worked, and those are two different statements, and I'm choosing to hold both of them at once right now, because I don't have the energy for anything more complicated. A silence. Finch said. There's something else. She reached into her jacket again, produced an envelope, plain white. The flap sealed with tape rather than adhesive, opened at some point and resealed. She set it on the bed beside Lena's hand. Declan Ward. She said Lena's hands moved, just slightly. An involuntary thing. He wasn't what the reports said. Finch's voice changed on this. Something underneath the precision now. Something that had been there for 5 years and had not been professionally useful, and so had been set aside and was now, finally, being allowed to be present. He wasn't a traitor. He wasn't what the after-action report named him. I know, Lena said. Finch stopped. You know, I suspected. For years. I could never. Lena stopped. What's in the envelope? He had a field encryption device, standard issue for team leaders. He'd been loaned one for the operation. Finch looked at the envelope on the bed. He wrote something the night before the operation. He'd discovered what Owens had done, how his own communications had been intercepted and used without his knowledge to establish a false trail that pointed to him as the source of the leak. He was trying to document it, to transmit it as a warning and a correction simultaneously. She paused. He set the device to broadcast on a low-frequency loop, automated. He was trying to reach someone who could stop the operation from proceeding. Another pause. Shorter. He didn't reach anyone in time. Lena said nothing. My extraction team found the device still transmitting when they reached the site 22 days after the operation. The letter was the last file he'd uploaded to it. Finch looked at the envelope. I've been waiting 5 years for a moment when giving it to you wouldn't put you in more danger than you were already in. She looked at Lena directly. This is that moment. Lena looked at the envelope beside her hand. Didn't pick it up yet. He tried to warn you, Finch said. He died trying to warn you, Bowman said quietly from the wall. I'll give you both some time. He left, the door closed. And the room was just the two of them. A woman who had spent 5 years thinking she was carrying something that was her fault. And the woman who had spent 5 years knowing it wasn't but unable to say so safely. Finch stood. I'll be outside when you're ready. She left. Alone, Lena sat with the envelope beside her hand for a long time without touching it. The monitor tracked her heart rate. Steady. The Colorado sky outside the window had moved from afternoon pale to early evening gold, without her noticing the transition. She'd been in this room long enough that the light had changed. She picked up the envelope, opened it the way you open something you understood the weight of, carefully, without rushing. Like the manner of opening was itself something she owed him. His handwriting was exactly what she remembered. Terrible. The specific irritability of a person who thought faster than their hand could move, and had never made peace with the gap. She'd given him grief about it for 2 years. He'd always promised to improve, and never done a single thing about it. She read it. He'd written it quickly. She could see that in the pressure of the pen and the abbreviated letters. He'd known he was running out of time even while he was writing it. But he'd gotten it all down, everything he'd discovered, the intercepted communications. The way Owens had built a structure that made Ward's device appear to be the source of the leak when it had in fact been used without his knowledge. The documentation he'd found, the timeline, the names, and at the end 2 paragraphs that weren't about any of that. He'd written about the unit, about each person by name. Small things, a specific memory, a specific quality he'd observed. The things you remembered about people when you understood, you might not have the chance to say them out loud. He'd written about her last. She read that part 3 times. Then she set the letter down on her chest, closed her eyes. The thing she'd been carrying for 5 years, the specific weight of having trusted someone and having that trust become the mechanism of catastrophe. It had a different shape now. Not gone. The weight of 6 dead people in a canyon didn't go anywhere. But the shape of it had changed because the story underneath it had changed. He hadn't chosen wrong. He'd been used and discovered it, and tried with everything he had left to fix it. 22 years old, afraid of dogs, brought candy to every briefing because he thought no one noticed. Handwriting that was genuinely an offense against legibility. He'd tried. She let herself know that without immediately doing anything with the knowing. Just let it be true for a moment, present in the room, not managed or processed or converted into the next practical thing. He tried. After a long time, she didn't track how long, she reached under her pillow, took out the folded paper with the 6 names on it, held it in one hand and Declan's letter in the other. Looked at both, okay, she said, to the room, to the ceiling. To Declan Ward and the 6 names and the 5 years, and the woman she'd been in Utah, who had genuinely believed that the right thing to do with survival was to make herself as small as possible, so the guilt wouldn't have as much surface area to work with. Okay, not absolution. She wasn't in the business of granting herself absolution, but something adjacent to it. The thing that happened when you discovered that the story you'd been living inside was missing a piece that, once added, didn't change what had happened but changed what it meant. She folded Declan's letter carefully, put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, which was hanging on the chair beside the bed. It sat there next to her heart, which was something she decided to let be intentional. Then she pressed the call button for the nurse. "Can you ask Commander Bowman to come back in?" she said when the nurse appeared. "And Deputy Director Finch, if she's still here." "They're both in the hall," the nurse said. "They've been there since they left." Lena looked at the door. 2 people who had been standing in a hallway for however long that had been, waiting for her to be ready. "Send them in," she said. They came back in together. Bowman to the chair he'd clearly claimed as his. Finch to the one beside the bed, where she sat with the same stillness as before, except that something in her posture had changed. Less held, less braced. Like a person who had been waiting for a verdict and had received one that was livable. Lena looked at Finch. "I'm not there yet," she said, "with you. I want you to know that's not the same as saying, I'm not going to get there. It just means not yet." Finch held her gaze. "That's fair. He tried to warn us." Lena said it plainly. "I needed to know that. I needed that to be in the actual story instead of the version I've been carrying." She paused. "Thank you for keeping it safe long enough to give it to me." Finch nodded once. "And that was enough for now. Not everything. But enough," Bowman said. "There are some things we need to figure out." Lena looked at him. "How many things?" "At least 3, he leaned forward. "Your status, your identity. And what comes next?" She looked at the window. The evening light was doing something complicated with the mountains in the distance. The Colorado Rockies catching the last of the sun and holding it in a way that made everything look more permanent than it was. She'd been inside too long. She had the specific restlessness of someone whose body was healed enough to know it was still in a bed. "My status," she said. "What are my options?" Finch spoke. "Owens being in custody changes the landscape significantly. The threat to your identity is contained. You could legitimately disappear again. Cleaner this time, better documentation, no loose threads. We have the capacity to do that." She paused. "Or your status as Lena Voss can be formally reinstated. The death record can be corrected. Bravo Wraith can be officially acknowledged rather than buried." Another pause, longer. "Both are real options. Neither one is the obvious right answer." Lena was quiet for a moment. There's a third option, Bowman said. She looked at him. Stay, he said it simply. Not as Lena Voss. Necessarily if that's not what you want. Not in an operational capacity. But there's a training gap that you are uniquely qualified to fill. He looked at her steadily. What you know, how you think under pressure, how you assess a space, how you move through terrain and make decisions faster than the situation is developing. That can't be taught from a manual. It can only be transmitted by someone who's actually done it. He paused. I'm not selling you a story about meaning and purpose. I'm telling you there are people who are going to go into bad situations. And some of them will come home because of what you teach them. And some of them won't because you weren't there to teach it. She looked at him for a long time. You're describing a teaching position. I'm describing the thing that happens after teaching positions, when someone who's good at teaching becomes the person who builds what other people are taught, Finch said. There's a program, in development. Marksmanship, tactical operations. Field medicine, sir. All of it needs a complete overhaul based on what's actually working in the field, rather than what looks defensible in a budget review. We need someone to build the curriculum from the ground up. She paused. Your way, based on what actually saves lives. Lena looked at the window. She thought about Utah, the cabin. 400 square feet and the theory that the right amount of silence would eventually cancel out the noise in her head, the discovery that it did not work that way. That silence without purpose was not peace. It was just a different kind of noise with nothing to drown it out. She thought about Aldridge's sister, who was going to be a doctor and didn't know yet that she was ready. She thought about Declan Ward's terrible handwriting and the 2 paragraphs at the end of the letter, and the specific thing he'd written about her that she was going to need a lot more time to fully absorb. She thought about the 6 names on the paper under her pillow. I have conditions, she said. Finch said. Name them, no public record with my real name attached to anything. No media, no story. Whatever I build, it's built under my operational handle or not at all. Done. I design the curriculum, not a committee. Not a review board staffed by people whose last field assignment was a decade ago. Me, she looked at Finch. You can have approval authority. You don't get design authority. I'll back you in every room where that needs defending, and can step back at any time. No process, no formal request, no questions. If I need to stop, I stop. And I have access to whatever mental health support I decide I need, without it being documented in a way that affects my standing, Finch said. Done, done and done. Lena looked at Bowman. He said nothing. Just looked back at her with the expression of someone who had said what he had to say and was now waiting for her to decide what she was going to do with it. Not pushing, not withdrawing, just present, available. Exactly where he'd been since she'd stepped off that truck 4 days ago, and he'd watched her catalogue an entire base in 4 seconds and decided she was worth paying attention to. Okay, she said. Not dramatic, not ceremonial, just okay. The word of someone who had made a decision and was moving toward it. Aldridge came the next morning, not in uniform, jeans, a grey shirt. The deliberate civilian clothes of someone who had decided to show up as himself rather than his rank, which Lena noted and appreciated without saying so. He had his phone in his hand and a video call already running. He held it up without preamble. She wanted to say something on the screen. A young woman, dark hair, sharp eyes, wearing scrubs with a hospital ID. She clearly hadn't gotten around to clipping on yet. 21 years old and already carrying herself with the particular focus of someone who knew what they were going to do with their life and was doing it. The young woman looked at the screen. Not at Aldridge. At Lena. Is this her? She asked. Yeah, Aldridge said. That's her. Brianna nodded. Like that was enough, like she didn't need a name for what she wanted to say. Nate told me some of what happened. Enough. She was direct in the way people were direct when they'd thought carefully about what they wanted to say, and weren't going to waste either person's time getting there. I start my clinical rotation in 2 weeks. I've been terrified about it for months. Like maybe I'm not actually ready. Maybe I only think I am. She paused. But Nate said something you told him. About everyone struggling, even people who look like they're not. About being afraid of doing something wrong. being different from not being ready. She looked straight into the camera. I've been thinking about that every day since he told me. Lena looked at the screen. At this young woman who was going to walk into an emergency department in 2 weeks and discover she was more capable than she knew, which was going to be terrifying and true simultaneously, which was the nature of most things worth doing. You're ready, Lena said. Brianna looked at her for a moment. How do you know? Because you're still scared. People who aren't scared anymore have stopped paying attention to what matters, she paused. You're ready. Go find out I'm right. Brianna's face did something complicated and brief. Then she smiled, clean and real, and without performance. Thank you for bringing him back. And for the other part too. The call ended. Aldridge put his phone in his pocket, looked at the window, cleared his throat once in the way people cleared their throats when they were not going to acknowledge what had just happened in their face. She's going to be extraordinary, I know, Lena said. He looked at her. Are you going to be okay? She considered this with the honesty she'd been practicing in the hours since Finch and Bowman had left the room the previous night. Not the reflexive okay, not the operational fine, not the functional answer designed to close the question. Yes, she said. I think actually yes, which was different from previous answers, which was itself something. He nodded, didn't make it larger than it was, which was the right call. For what it's worth, he said, standing. Whatever you decide to do next, they're going to be lucky to have you. He left. She sat with the quiet of the room, with the paper under her pillow and Declan's letter in her jacket, and the pale Colorado light doing its late morning work on the mountains outside the window, with the choice she'd made the day before sitting in her chest, not as weight, but as direction. As something that pointed toward rather than away. She'd spent 5 years in the business of away. She was going to try toward for a while. 3 years later, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. A Tuesday in October that had decided to be both summer and fall simultaneously, and was committed to the disagreement between them. The oak trees on the base perimeter were doing the thing they did in that 3rd week of October. Some leaves turned, some still green, the whole thing refusing to commit to either season, which Lena had come to think of as the right aesthetic. For a place where people trained for situations that also refused to commit to predictable outcomes. She stood at the front of a classroom that smelled like gun oil and fresh coffee. And the particular quality of attention that 28 people produced when they were trying very hard to look like they weren't nervous. She looked different than she had at Ashburn. Not older exactly, settled. The specific quality of a person who has found the place they're supposed to be standing and has stood in it long enough that the ground feels permanent rather than provisional. Her hair was shorter, practical. The tattoo on her wrist, the links in mid-strike, the serial number beneath it, was visible above the cuff of her jacket, which she'd stopped hiding somewhere in the 2nd year. Not as a statement. She'd simply run out of reasons to hide it, and hiding things had become something she was doing less of in general. The class had been running 6 weeks. This was the culminating assessment day. Live fire, stress conditions, everything they'd been building toward compressed into the morning's work. She'd watched them transform over those 6 weeks, in the way she'd watched every class transform, which was not the way movies showed transformation. Not sudden, not dramatic, but incrementally, through repetition and failure, and the gradual discovery that they were more capable than the version of themselves they'd arrived with. They were good. She would not tell them they were good yet. That was for after. After they'd done the thing and knew it from the inside, which was the only knowing that stuck. Private Sloane Rafferty sat in the front row. 22 years old. Brown hair pulled back. A quality of attention that Lena had identified in the first week as different from the others. Not more eager, exactly, but more precise. She didn't just absorb information. She turned it over, tested it, came back with the next question already formed. She'd finish at the top of this class by a margin that had started small and grown into something the rest of them noticed. Rafferty raised her hand. Instructor Voss. Rafferty. I want to ask you something. She said it carefully. Not timid, considered. They say you held off 200 people alone from a water tower that was collapsing underneath you. That you called fire missions for the entire engagement from the top of it, while they were actively trying to take you down. She paused. Is that true? The room was very still. 28 people who had heard various versions of this story over the 6 weeks, from various sources, with various degrees of embellishment, now waiting for the person at the center of it to say what she said. Lena looked at Rafferty. She didn't deflect, didn't perform modesty, didn't reach for the version of this that was smaller or larger than the actual thing. What's true, she said, is that I had eyes on a position where I could help people I was responsible for, and I took it. And what's also true is that 6 people died in that fight who had the same people at home that you have. She held Rafferty's gaze. I think about them more than I think about the tower. And I need you to understand that before you leave this program, because the skill you're building here exists in service of bringing people home, not in service of the story that gets told afterward, silence in the room, not uncomfortable, the other kind, the kind that meant something had landed. Get your gear, she said. Range in 10 minutes, they moved. The sound of 28 people finding their purpose filling the space. She watched them go. Rafferty lingered at the door. Instructor Voss, quiet. I didn't request this program because of the story. I requested it because of what you built here. What it actually teaches. She paused. I don't want to be the person who does the impressive thing. I want to be the person who brings everyone home. Lena looked at her, this 22-year-old woman, standing in a doorway of a classroom that hadn't existed 3 years ago, saying the thing, the precise actual thing, that Lena had spent 3 years trying to transmit without saying it directly, because some things had to arrive from the inside rather than be delivered from the front of the room. Get your gear, Lena said. Rafferty almost smiled. Rafferty. She stopped. That's exactly what I'm teaching. Rafferty left. The range sat at the edge of the base where the tree line began, and the world opened into the kind of distance that made everything feel contingent and possible simultaneously. Lena walked the line, corrected grips, adjusted stances, said less than she would have in the first weeks because at this point the work didn't need words. The words had happened. Now it was the doing. Rafferty at the far end, 300 meters, wind from the northwest, steady at 6 knots. She was running the ballistic calculation in her head. Lena could see it happening in the small stillness before the shot, the way breathing changed, the way a body gathered itself. She fired, clean center hit, no celebration, immediate relocation. Set up again, Lena moved on. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She stepped off the line and checked it, Bowman. They talked every 2 weeks, had been for 3 years. Not every conversation was significant. Some were about logistics, some were about the program, some were about nothing specific, which she'd come to understand was its own category of significant. The nothing specific conversations were the ones where she was allowed to just exist in the world without performing anything. She answered, "How's the class?" he asked. "Good." Better than good. She looked at the range. At Rafferty resetting. At the others doing what they'd been taught to do. "Rafferty's going to be something. You said that about the last 3 best students. I say it when it's true." She moved further from the line so the noise of the range was behind her. "How's the work?" "The kind of work that mostly involves sitting in rooms and advocating for things I believe in to people who need convincing." A pause. "I'm better at it than I expected. Turns out the skills transfer, persistence and the willingness to say the uncomfortable true thing. Exactly those." A pause. "Are you okay?" Actually okay, she had learned, over 3 years, that this question from him meant something specific. It meant, not operationally, not professionally. It meant you, specifically, the actual person. The one who wrote the 6 names on a piece of paper that she carried in her jacket next to Declan Ward's letter. She thought about it honestly. "Yeah," she said. "Today I actually am. Good days are allowed. I'm still getting used to that. I know. You're doing well at it." She looked at the mountains in the distance, the blue ridge on the horizon. Different mountains than the ones she'd moved through with a gunshot wound and a demolitions pack 3 years ago, but mountains in the same way, which was permanent and indifferent and present regardless of what happened at their feet. "There's something I've been meaning to say," she said. "Go ahead." "Coming back," she said, "to Ashburn. I thought I was coming back to see if I could still do something useful. Whether survival could mean something." She paused. "I didn't expect it to be the place where I figured out I actually wanted to be alive. A silence on the line. The good kind. The kind that meant someone was receiving something rather than just waiting to respond." "I'm glad you came back," Bowman said, quietly. The way he said things that were true and mattered, and he wasn't going to dress up in anything more complicated than exactly what they were. "So am I," she said. She meant it. She lowered the phone. Stood for a moment longer in the October air, with the range noise behind her and the mountains ahead, and the specific feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because the world had arranged itself into something easy. It hadn't. But because she had arranged herself to meet it honestly, and that was turning out to be enough. She walked back to the line. At the far end, Rafferty was resetting for her third iteration. Shoulders right, breathing right. The posture of someone who had stopped thinking about whether she could do it and started just doing it, which was the whole distance between trained and ready. Lena watched her fire, perfect. She moved down the line. Stopped beside a private named Okafor, who was fighting a grip issue that had been showing up under stress conditions, not in training, only under stress. The body's way of reminding you that it had its own ideas about how to handle pressure. "Left hand," she said, "quiet. You're squeezing on the breath instead of the pause." "Feel the difference," Okafor adjusted, fired. "There it is," Lena said. "Remember what that feels like. Your body knows it now. You just have to let it." She moved on, down the line of 28 people, stopping where she was needed. Saying what needed to be said and nothing more. This was what teaching actually looked like. Not the speech from the front of the room, not the impressive demonstration, but this. The individual moment, the specific correction. The recognition of what one particular person needed to hear in order to close the gap between what they knew and what they could do. At the end of the line, she stopped and looked back at all of them. 28 people doing the thing she'd spent 3 years building a method to teach. Each one of them was going to go somewhere after this. Some of those places would be dangerous. Some of them would face the specific mathematics of a situation where the numbers didn't favor survival and would need to find a way through it anyway. She couldn't go with them. She couldn't protect them from what came next. But she could give them what she had. Every hard thing she'd learned, stripped of the version that made her look capable, and rendered instead in the version that actually helped. The failures, the adjustments, the things she'd gotten wrong, and gotten wrong differently, and corrected again. The real curriculum, which was not how to be impressive, but how to stay alive long enough to matter. That was what she was passing forward. Not the tower. Not the canyon shot, or the depot explosion, or the night she'd eliminated a hostile unit from 2,000 meters in the dark, with a suppressed rifle that the inventory didn't acknowledge. This. 28 people on a range in October, learning how to bring themselves home. She reached into her jacket pocket. The letter was there, had been there every day for 3 years. She didn't read it, didn't need to. She knew every word, but the weight of it in her pocket was something she'd stopped wanting to be without. He'd tried. That was the thing. That was the fact she'd been given 3 years ago in a hospital room in Colorado and had been carrying differently ever since. He tried. With everything he had left. In the minutes when it counted, he didn't make it in time, but he tried. She had been trying too. Not to make up for what happened. You didn't make up for that. The math of it didn't work that way. And pretending it did was a way of not respecting what was lost, but trying because it was the thing to do with the time she had. Because the alternative was the cabin, and the silence that was louder than anything she'd encountered in a forward operating base. Because Rafferty was going to walk into something someday, and she was going to have, in her hands, and in her muscle memory, and in the specific way her nervous system had been trained to respond. The things that Lena had spent 31 years learning at the cost she'd paid. And that was not nothing. That was, in fact, the thing. She looked at the range, at 28 people doing what they'd been taught, and she thought, this is what survival looks like when you do something with it. Not the water tower, not the impossible shot at 1100 meters, with a compromised shooting position and variable wind. This Tuesday morning, October, a range at the edge of a base in North Carolina. 28 people learning how to come home. She walked back toward the line. Rafferty, she called. Rafferty looked up, again, faster this time. Don't think about the target. Think about the decision before the target. Rafferty set up, fired perfect. Lena moved on down the line. The mountains held the light. The work continued.